the Congressman for opening remarks.
Thank you, DeAndre. Hello, everybody. Thank you, as always, for joining. I look forward to a really, really good discussion with you all today. I'll just say a few words up front, and I'll start by acknowledging that this is an anxious time for a lot of us. There's a lot of understandable anxiety in our communities and around the country about the ongoing economic crisis, the situation with the coronavirus, which unfortunately we're still dealing with as a country, given some of our failures of leadership in confronting it, about the civic unrest in many parts of our country that we are all seeing on our television screens, and of course about the coming election. And I think some of the anxiety is likely manufactured because of this election coming up. There are people who want us to feel afraid and who want us to feel as if the country is hopelessly divided over these questions.
Welcome, and thank you for choosing freeconferencecall.com. Your
Hello.
people around the world communicate for free. Please enter your access code.
I think we all know that voice. But one of the reasons I really love doing these sessions is that they are always a reminder that, in fact, although we may belong to different political parties, we don't all agree 100% on the issues of the day, that there is actually a lot of consensus in our district, in our state, in our country, among reasonable, level-headed people about where we should be headed and what our government should be doing, whether it's on healthcare or gun violence or the need for investment in infrastructure, all issues that we've talked about a lot over the last couple of years, certainly about our response to COVID-19. I think most of us in New Jersey understand that this is a public health crisis, and unless we deal with the public health aspects, we're not going to be able to do anything else. We want to put human life above all other interests, and we want our government officials to take responsibility rather than blaming others. When it comes to the violence we've seen in many parts of the country, I think most of us, we'll see, we'll talk about it, but I imagine most of us will agree that it is wrong for police officers to use excessive force. It is wrong for protesters to burn things and destroy things. It is wrong for vigilantes to take the law into their own hands, that we need leaders who will themselves model good respect for the rule of law and use their voices, use their influence to calm things down. That's what I've been trying to do as best as I can. And the leaders I support are the ones who are also trying to do the same thing. So, you know, I think the big question, the big political question facing the country is, how do we take all this consensus? Because I think what I'm attributing to voters in our neck of the woods is probably true for voters in most of the country. How do we take that real consensus among Americans and translate it into a government that actually responds to that pragmatic, overwhelming majority of us, and cut through some of these manufactured divisions? And I hope that we'll have a chance to discuss that big question today. I know you all have a lot of questions about everything from the nuts and bolts of some of the COVID-19 relief programs, especially unemployment. And I look forward to answering those, about our negotiations to try to get a new package, which I'm involved with up on the Hill. And of course, all of these big issues happening around the country. So why don't we go straight to you and begin with, I guess we're going to begin with some of the most frequent pre-submitted questions. Is that right, DeAndre? Before we
yes, Congressman.
Questions.
Yes, sir. We'll start with some of the frequently asked questions. So I will go ahead and give you your first one, Tom. What can be done to make sure DeJoy reverses the changes to the post office?
Well, so Postmaster General DeJoy, as you all know, was recently appointed and has presided over, or at least attempted to preside over, a number of changes to mail delivery that the Trump administration has acknowledged, that he has acknowledged, have the effect of slowing mail down. And he defends it by saying that the post office was bankrupt and they need to make these changes, and he didn't cook them all up in his head and they were going to happen anyway. Many of us are suspicious that there was a different agenda here at play, because after all, the president himself has quite openly said that he wants to mess with the post office to slow down, to make it harder for people to vote by mail this November. Whatever the motivations for these changes, there's no debate about the effect that they started to have, that in fact, we have seen significant slowdowns, 10, 20%, according to the Postal Service's own statistics, in on-time mail delivery, everything from first-class mail to priority mail. And for that to happen in the middle of a crisis in which we are all much more dependent on mail deliveries for packages, for all the stuff that we're not going out of our homes to get, and of course for that to be happening in the run-up to an important national election in which way more people than ever before are going to be voting by mail, is absolutely wrong and irresponsible. So what have we done? House of Representatives has been banging the drum on this. We have held oversight hearings, we've conducted investigations, we have passed legislation with bipartisan support to reverse some of the changes that the Postmaster General has made. Many of you, I'm sure, know that the Senate has shown no interest in taking up this legislation, but already the pressure that we have brought to bear has resulted in the Postmaster General, at least temporarily, suspending or reversing some of the changes or planned changes. So for example, he had planned and had begun to inform the states that election mail, the ballots, would no longer be treated as first-class mail. It would be treated as bulk mail and obviously handled much more slowly. He has reversed that. It will continue to be treated as first-class mail. That's in our legislation to make it permanent, but for this election, it's going to be done correctly. We are told, and we are investigating this, that some of the overtime changes have been ended. So one of the things he did was to prevent mail carriers from taking overtime to ensure that every piece of mail that arrives at a post office in the morning is delivered by the end of the day. And you can see if you leave a backlog on Monday night, you have even more on Tuesday, and the backlog for Wednesday will be even greater as a result. So we are told that that is no longer happening, but I trust but verify, and we are continuing our oversight to try to make sure that that is indeed the case. Folks at the Postal Service tell us that they believe they can handle this election. They have, despite all the problems, what it takes to be able to handle the volume of mail so long as nobody messes with them. And we're going to do everything in our power to ensure that nobody messes with them at this incredibly important moment. So there's more we can discuss there, but let me start with that broad overview.
Thank you, Tom. Our next frequently asked question is, what is the status of a second round of PPP loans?
So PPP is the Paycheck Protection Program. This was the small business loan program that we put in place in March under the CARES Act, which allowed small businesses all across America to apply for loans that can now be fully forgiven if the small business used 60% or more of the loan to pay for their payroll expenses. The goal was keep the small business alive, keep the employees on payroll during the time when our small businesses had to shut down or just curtail, as many of them still have to do, their operations because of COVID. Hugely successful program. There were problems at the beginning, which we fixed. In our district, we've had well over $1 billion of assistance from the federal government to our small businesses. I've been doing tours around the district, talking to small business owners. Virtually everyone I've spoken to has gotten a PPP loan and has credited that loan, again, forgivable, so it ends up being free money, with enabling them to survive at least this far. Now, unfortunately, we're not out of the woods. We were supposed to be out of the woods, but because of the failed national public health response, we still have 1,000 people a day dying in the United States. New Jersey's doing much better, but we have to be very careful here, and consumers are going to be careful, whatever the government decides. And so I do believe that we need an extension for those small business owners who feel that they need a little bit more help. There is, I think, widespread consensus, Republicans and Democrats, that the next coronavirus package should include some extension of PPP. My guess is that we will limit it a little bit more to the smallest businesses, particularly very small businesses with less than 10 employees. So I think I'm relatively confident that that is something that will emerge from these otherwise frustrating negotiations that we've been having. And of course, we will work very closely one-on-one with our small business owners who need any help accessing PPP or any other program if they need that.
Thank you, Tom. Our next question, what is the status of the tunnel being repaired between New York and New Jersey?
So Hudson River Tunnel, this is the Gateway project. And yes, it's being repaired every weekend. That's the problem, because it's 110 years old. It is decrepit, it's falling apart, does not have much life left. And 2 tracks between New Jersey and New York carry all of the commuter traffic in the busiest railway corridor in the United States of America. It's completely unsustainable. That's why, as many of you know, I made funding for the Gateway project my #1 priority in terms of delivering for our state. I got on the transportation committee in order to help deliver those things. Why is it hard? Trump administration, or at least the president personally, has opposed this project for all kinds of reasons we can speculate about. We've had to work really hard to break through that resistance, and I'd say we're halfway there. We have gotten, through relentless pressure, approval and funding for the first stage of the Gateway project, which is the bridge, the Portal Bridge. So between Newark and the tunnel, there's another spot where it narrows to 2 tracks, and there's this 110-year-old bridge that is supposed to open when boats come through and sometimes fails to close. Every train passing over it has to slow way down. So that is a major current bottleneck, and we got that done. This was the subject of my first piece of legislation that I got passed when I was elected in 2018. So something that, again, I've been working very hard on. For the Hudson River Tunnel, what we need is to build a new set of tubes, 2 new tubes, which once built would enable us to fully repair and refurbish the old tubes. Eventually, we end up with 4, which not only clears up the delays that are happening now, but doubles the capacity of trains that can travel between New Jersey and New York. That would be permanent 1-seat ride for the Raritan Valley line, all of those advantages. What's holding that up right now is, again, it is the president's opposition. They have been sitting on an environmental impact statement for 2 years now, past their own self-imposed deadline. They have it, it's done. They're just refusing to release it so that they have an excuse not to provide the approval along with funding that we have been actually appropriating. So I got a provision in our latest infrastructure bill that basically takes 1 full-time position away from the Secretary of Transportation in her personal office for every month that an environmental impact statement for a project like this is late. So, whether by electing a president who will simply support this, or through that kind of legislative jujitsu, one way or another, we are going to get the Hudson River Tunnel.
Thank you, Tom. We will now switch over to our live question and answer portion. Again, if you have a question at any point, please just use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. Please include your name. That's very, very important. Some have like different names for different organizations and things like that. So please just make sure you include your name, an email, a phone number, and the town you're from, plus your question. And we'll make sure you get added to the list. And if we can't get to your question here on the call, we'll definitely have our staff follow up offline. Additionally, I will be sending around an email. I do see a few questions coming in that are regarding casework. So if you have a question that's in regards to anything about unemployment or assistance with a federal agency, please send an email detailing your situation to the email address that I'm sending around now. And that will be the best way for us to get in contact with you and hopefully get you some answers. Again, that's for anyone that needs any help with unemployment or assistance with a federal agency. Please email the email I just sent around, NJ07 Casework. Our first question, going back just one more second, I'm sorry. When I do call on you, please just go ahead and unmute your mic and begin asking your question. If you're having any troubles or any issues, I will just step in and try to unmute you on my end, but we'll just try to keep it seamlessly flowing. And as soon as we call on you, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question. Our first question comes from Keisha Johnson. Can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, hi Keisha.
Hi, Tom. My question was regarding the stimulus package, and how close are you all to a decision with releasing or coming to a decision about the stimulus package?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that question. I'll tell you, if this were left up to me and rank and file members of the House, the Democrats, Republicans who I know and work with on a daily basis, I think we could do this today. It wouldn't be very complicated. It's much more complicated because the president is involved. Majority Leader McConnell is involved. It's high politics, and so we're all suffering from the delays that causes. But here's where we are. 3 months ago, the House of Representatives passed the HEROES Act, which was our opening bid for the next stimulus package. It was a big, ambitious bill. It dealt with unemployment assistance, more stimulus checks, the PPP program, state and local government relief. I'll mention that more in a second. Hazard pay for our frontline medical and transit workers, the post office, election security, everything that we felt needed to be done to secure the country and the economy in this pandemic. $3.4 trillion was the price tag, so really, really expensive. We then waited over 2 months to get a counteroffer. Everybody knew, everyone understood that these programs were running out and that we would probably need more. But we have no partner to negotiate with because the Senate refused to take up any bill. Finally, Senator McConnell put forward a proposal for the Senate Republicans to do something much smaller, about $1 trillion, as against $3.4 trillion that we had proposed. And unfortunately, he couldn't even pass that in the Senate because half of his Republican members are against doing anything, even $1. So we had passed something, he couldn't pass something, but he put this forward. And we've been negotiating on that basis ever since. And we have been saying, okay, we get it, 3.4 is more than you can stomach, but obviously 1 is too little for us. So let's find a place in the middle to meet and then work out the details. So we've offered to go down to 2.2 trillion from 3.4. And there's still, between the White House and the Senate, they're still saying no dice, which I don't quite understand, because I I really think most reasonable people, and I count some of my Republican colleagues in the House in this category, would say, well, of course you meet somewhere in the middle, and then there are going to be details that you have to fight over a little bit, and maybe it ends up being 2 or 2.3 or 1.9, but it's going to be somewhere in that range. What are we arguing about? I think a big item when we get down to substance is that we think, I believe very, very strongly, that we need a relief package for our state, county, and local governments. Many of us have spoken about this before. You know, Westfield, Cranford, Mountainside, Union County, the state of New Jersey, they all have to balance their budgets, and they're bleeding revenue because of all of the economic shutdowns, sales taxes, for example. And so what do? The only options are either cut services at a time when demand for service is actually greater because of COVID. And that includes first responders, includes schools, all the things that state and local does for us, or raise property taxes. I don't want either of those things to happen. And so we do desperately need some relief. All of my Republican mayors, just about all of them in my district, who probably disagree with me on a lot of things, agree on this. We had just about all of our local elected officials, both parties, get on a letter to the congressional leadership saying, please do this. And that's a point of contention because I'm insisting on it, House is insisting on it, but so far Mark Meadows on behalf of President Trump and Senator McConnell have been unwilling to do it. But we do agree on a lot of things. We agree it's got to be something more on unemployment, something more on PPP. We all want to do something for our schools. The difference is that a lot of the Republicans, not all of them, but a lot of them are insisting that any school aid from the federal government be conditioned on schools physically reopening, which I don't think it's right for them to be telling us whether schools should physically reopen. That should be a local decision based on our own comfort level, based on conditions here. And whether they're open physically or virtually, there are costs associated with that, different costs for different things, but there's still new costs associated with it. So that's something we're really, there's a couple of things we're still fighting over. You ask when, I cannot tell you. The sooner it happens, the better. I think there are a lot of senators, both parties, who are up for re-election this year, if we want to talk about the politics of this, who are saying we need something done. And I think, I really do think many of them will help to prevail on Mitch McConnell to allow something to get done. As soon as we have the political will, the compromise is pretty easy to see. It's, we get some of what we want, but not all of what we want. We meet pretty much halfway in terms of the money. Get this done, help the American people. DeAndre?
Okay.
Thank you, Tom.
Sure.
Thank you.
I know there were some pre-submitted questions on the unemployment insurance.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you have any of those queued up, but I think a lot of folks have questions about this $300 additional plus up that folks may be eligible for. You know what I mean?
Yes. So there's a few. One, if you want to take this one, one is, what is the status of more assistance for the unemployed?
Right. So obviously, ideally, we pass this bill that I just mentioned. That is overwhelmingly the best way to do this. But until then, let me tell you what's going on. You may have heard that President Trump issued an executive order in which, among other things, he tried to extend the enhanced unemployment benefits that we have been providing to folks who were laid off because of COVID-19. So it was $600 a week. That expired. So a lot of people are asking, well, what about this new program that was offered by the president's executive order? So here's how it's supposed to work. The money comes from FEMA, from the Federal Emergency Management Agency, which I think is problematic, but there's some money there. It's supposed to be $300 per week from the federal government, potentially $100 from state governments if they choose to pitch in that extra $100. So in New Jersey, our state government has applied for this program. They are not going to chip in the additional $100 because, again, our state is bleeding revenue, and now we're asking them to throw in $100 extra per unemployed person. We're already going bankrupt. I just don't think that we can afford to do that. But they've applied for the $300 extra. Under FEMA rules, if you have been receiving unemployment, you are going to have to recertify in order to get this additional $300. You have to certify with the state that your unemployment is related to COVID-19. And again, if you're already on receiving unemployment, you will get instructions from the New Jersey Department of Labor that lays all this out, and you don't have this yet. But when they come, this is what they will say, that you have to certify that on their website. They will then work through those, and probably, what I'm told, late September, folks will get likely a lump sum payment that goes back to August 1st. So $300 a week going back to August 1st. And because this money is coming from FEMA, which does not have an unlimited amount of money, and actually kind of needs that money if there's a hurricane, for example, this is going to run out probably 6 to 7 weeks if this is what we're using to help people who still need that assistance. So that's how it's supposed to work for anybody who is wondering. But as you can tell from my presentation of it, this is not ideal. What we need, if we believe we need additional enhanced unemployment benefits, we need Congress and the president to agree to actually fund it and not rob the Federal Emergency Management Agency to get this money.
Thank you, Tom. Our next live question will come from William. William, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Really had two questions, but the most important question really relates to emergency use authorizations that come out of the FDA. And there's a growing concern coming out of the medical and scientific community that too much political pressure is being applied to the FDA and Stephen Hahn to issue these EUAs, for hydroxychloroquine and for convalescent plasma. And the biggest worry is that there will be undue pressure to give an EUA to a vaccine before it's really certifiable. And I just want to bring this point up because it's something I hope that you and Congress can monitor very closely, because it's raising a great deal of concern in these communities. There was just a real challenge on Medscape from the author Eric Topol, "Dear Commissioner Hahn, tell the truth or resign." Mm-hmm. There was another article in JAMA, which is not obviously a liberal medical journal, but voicing the same concerns about emergency use authorizations and political pressure. So could you please, first of all, just raise that awareness in Congress and think about some ways that we can really maintain vigilance and surveillance over the FDA during this process.
Thank you so much for raising that. I like your background, by the way. I don't think that's Union or Essex County, but
no.
Let it slide. So let me take a step back a little bit, because what you are raising is part of a much larger challenge that we're facing right now. We are, I think, getting a real education in America about how democratic government is supposed to work, how a constitutional democratic government is supposed to work. And there's one aspect of it that maybe we haven't thought about as much as American citizens until now. And that is that there are supposed to be parts of our government that are above and beyond politics, right? Some parts are supposed to be in the thick of the political battle, like Congress, like me, right? But there are parts of our government that are there permanently to serve us, the people. They do not serve a person, a president, or a party. The Justice Department is a good example, right? The FBI is a good example. They're there to enforce the law and to serve us. They're not there to go after a president's political enemies or to protect a president's political friends. The military is a good example. Our men and women in uniform fight for the country, not for a president, and God forbid that they should ever become politicized. The National Weather Service is supposed to tell us the weather, not what some politician with a Sharpie tells them the weather is. They're supposed to tell us the weather. The Centers for Disease Control, the Food and Drug Administration, two more good examples. The Post Office we were just talking about, it's another example, right? Your mail carrier isn't supposed to be a Democrat or Republican. I mean, they can be in their personal life, but not as it applies to the delivery of the mail. And we've kind of taken this for granted as Americans. In a lot of countries that I know well, people don't take this for granted because everything is political. We can't allow that to happen here. So you mentioned the FDA. Incredibly important that these decisions be made based on science, nothing else. The job of a president in dealing with an FDA is to say, please advise me on the science, and I will support you in whatever you need to do. That's the way it's supposed to work. What we have been seeing, unfortunately, is it's undeniable increasing political pressure on the FDA to produce results that the president seems to believe would be good for him politically, including, and this is the most concerning, as you mentioned, this quest to get a vaccine before an election. Now, I would love to see a vaccine tomorrow that is effective, right? I'm sure you would as well. And I'm all for throwing tons of money at that effort so that, consistent with normal standards of safety and efficacy, we get a vaccine faster than we've ever gotten one before, right? You can throw money at, making sure that we, let's say you have 10 candidates and maybe one of them is going to turn out to be good. You start mass producing all 10 so that if one is approved, you're ready to go and be able to help a lot of people. But absolutely no shortcuts when it comes to clinical trials that are needed to establish whether that vaccine is effective and safe. And we all know what would happen if we put a vaccine out there and, God forbid, it hurts people. Not only would people be hurt, but confidence, with all these anti-vaxxers out there already, it's bad enough, but confidence in the ultimate vaccine that will be effective and safe will be shattered. And we might never have enough people actually getting the vaccine, being willing to get the vaccine for it ever to provide us with that herd immunity that we want a vaccine to provide us. So this is so much is at stake here. And the fact that somebody is putting this pressure on the FDA for political, it's just, there's so many things to be angry about. This is one that we can't lose sight of. You ask what Congress can do. We are very much aware of it. We have been publicly and behind the scenes pressuring the FDA to resist this pressure. Some people have called on the guy to resign. I don't know if I want that, because the next guy is going to be is going to be a total political crony, hired, like William Barr, hired to destroy the independence of the FDA. So I'd almost rather have someone who's at least trying to weather this storm and who sees themselves as answerable to Congress as well as to the president. We're going to continue to have oversight hearings. Every form of public pressure we can bring to bear, we will. But we're just the House. So, lots of people ask me, can you pass a law? And the answer is yes, if the president signs it. You see the problem there. So we have these powers of oversight to compel information, documents, to remind these folks that they could even face legal jeopardy if they are party to decisions that cost lives. And that can be effective. That's what we're going to do. But we don't have an absolute power to counter the president in a sphere where he actually does have, unfortunately, considerable power. Thank you.
Yeah. Second part, though, a question. There was also a lot of concern about the payment program for COVID-related medical costs that was included, in the first relief bill. And New York Times had an article that said, this program's really not operating. Can you give us an update on the status?
Well, so what we did in the CARES Act in the first, or one of the first bills that has worked, is that the testing is free. But we've never enacted legislation that makes COVID-related treatment free for everybody who may not be insured, who needs that extra help. It's in the HEROES Act, which we passed in the House, but as we've been discussing, we don't have an ultimate deal on that yet. So one of the things we've asked for is to ensure one way or another, between private insurance or government support, that everybody, there's universal access to COVID treatment for the sake of the whole community, right? Because we all have a personal selfish stake in everybody being okay when it comes to COVID. So that's a subject of these negotiations. I didn't read the New York Times article, so I can't respond to that, but if you want to shoot that to us, you can even put the link, drop the link there. We can get back to you on any specific issues it raises.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for your representation and being a sane voice for us all here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Our next question comes from, I want to make sure I say it correct, Vinch. Vinch, can you hear us?
Yes. Good afternoon, Mr. Malinowski. I have two questions that are to be raised of significance. The first question that I propose to you is that, do you believe it to be necessary to establish a new constitution for the United States, considering that because the language of the Constitution is so old, along with the Bill of Rights, you can easily manipulate the bad wording of both parts of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. But the issue with the current Constitution is that there's no real apolitical body that can check the other three branches. What I propose under the new Constitution is to create this independent committee, which would require the approval of 3/4 of both houses of Congress, along with 2/3 of the Supreme Court. And they have the powers to investigate all three branches of government, along with all the state governments. And it will check all bills and will approve all nominees and all candidates for all offices in the United States. This is to ensure that that the governing doesn't become a completely partisan war. Mm-hmm. And the second question that I possess, in the event that the President of the United States cheats to win re-election, is the House of Representatives ready to launch investigations or possible articles of impeachment against the President if there is adequate evidence to prove that he cheated in the elections?
So let me take both of those. First of all, on the Constitution, I swore an oath to the Constitution that we have, and I continue to believe that it is a work of genius. Take nothing away from the problems we are experiencing right now. We have a constitution which may be very old, but which has stood the test of time. And I know people in many, many countries around the world, some that you may be very familiar with, if I can guess about your background, where people risk their lives for the dream of living under a system of constitutional checks and balances of the sort that the founders of this country gave us. Now, that Constitution, in a way, the most important phrase within it is right at the beginning. It says that our goal is to build a more perfect union. And the assumption behind that, that famous phrase is that America wasn't perfect, isn't perfect, will never be perfect, that we are an experiment in constantly making ourselves more perfect, using these tools that the document has given us to become better. And of course, that includes the possibility of amending the Constitution from time to which we've done almost 30 times now in our history. So I don't believe we need a new Constitution. I think, some people have said we should have a new constitutional convention from time to time. I think that would open up a can of worms. The question is, do we need constitutional amendments? I am a very strong supporter, for example, of a constitutional amendment to fix our campaign money system, to reverse the Supreme Court's decision in the Citizens United case, which basically said that corporations are people, and as such, both corporations and people can spend an unlimited amount of money to try to influence elections in this country. I think that has corrupted the political process, and it will take a constitutional amendment to empower the Congress to place some limits on all of this dark money that is being spent to influence our elections. So that's one I'm for. You're suggesting something that actually could probably be done maybe in a less far-reaching form without a constitutional amendment. Some people have suggested if we get a new administration that there be that we create a permanent independent counsel position at the Department of Justice, basically an independent prosecutor charged with investigating and, if necessary, prosecuting acts of official corruption, election interference and tampering, kind of high political crimes that that generally the president's attorney general is not, is at least conflicted out of being able to handle him or herself. I think that's worth considering. I haven't fully thought through the implications. Meanwhile, I'm very strongly in favor of legislation, which I hope we will get to in a new Congress with a new administration, that strengthens the independence of our inspectors general. Every government department has what is supposed to be an independent inspector general to ensure there is no wrongdoing, corruption, misuse of funds. This administration has tried to undermine that system. We need to strengthen it. Now, you asked about impeaching a president who cheats in an election. I think I can just answer that generically, right? Without reference to President Trump or any other person who may be in that office. Certainly, we have impeached a president for trying to cheat in an election. That was what Watergate was all about. Impeachment is the remedy that the Constitution gives us to ensure that that doesn't happen. And if it does, a president is held accountable. And so that would be an appropriate use of the impeachment power. But again, I'm answering you generically. I'm not saying if so-and-so does this, we're going to impeach them, right? Because it's a hypothetical question. Right now, there's a lot of other stuff we need to be focusing on to make sure that the November 3rd election is conducted honestly, with integrity. I believe we will have an election that we can believe in. I don't, I think President Trump's out there trying to destroy our confidence in this and saying it's going to be rigged. I think it's important as we deal with the shenanigans that they throw our way, that we also keep people's confidence that we can do this. And I believe that we can. So that's got to be the focus right now, preventing that rather than punishing it after the fact. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Malinowski.
Thank you, Tom. Our next question comes from Bill. Bill, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. So, Tom, I wanted to thank you for all the good work you've done so far in supporting your New Jersey constituents. And I know you've been working across the aisle for many years, including recently with Representative Denver Riggleman from Virginia's 5th District. Representative Riggleman also has a bill, which I don't think that you've co-sponsored, which is the Dr. Lorna Breen Act, which would support frontline healthcare workers like Dr. Breen, who unfortunately committed suicide after contracting COVID herself in a New York hospital. And his bill would provide mental health services, intervention, education of healthcare workers so they know how to help colleagues and so on. I wonder if you are concerned about those issues and whether you'll support that bill and similar support legislation.
I definitely care a lot about those issues, and I can't tell you about the bill right now because I'd want to look at it. But here's what we will look at it today, and we will just leave your email, and we'll get back to you tomorrow and let you know one way or another. It certainly sounds like the sort of thing I would support, and I've been working with Congressman Riggleman, who's a Republican member from Virginia, on another burning issue. So he'd be very thrilled if I told him that one of my constituents lobbied me to support his bill. So let's take a look at it, and we'll let you know shortly.
Okay, great.
I can support
Thanks.
it. Thank you.
Thank you both. Our next question comes from Lee. Lee, can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, there you go.
Okay, I'm sorry, I couldn't find the mute button. So, I wrote that question out so long ago, I have to look for it. I've been listening to everyone and I forgot what my question was.
That's okay.
I don't see it here. So,
Do you want us to come back to you?
About?
I can, it was something, if I have it right, it's what about the declaration to not report election interference to Congress?
Thank you.
What else can be
I have a
done?
million questions. That's why I don't remember the one I wrote down. This recent thing about Congress is not going to get briefings on election interference.
Right.
So what can we do?
Well, so here's the deal. We've been getting live briefings from leaders of the intelligence community, so the various intelligence agencies and the Department of Homeland Security and the Justice Department about what they're doing to protect our election from foreign interference. And these are good, thorough briefings. They're honest. Sometimes we go back and forth, we challenge them, but these are pros, these are patriots who are trying to do their job. And one of their jobs is to brief the Congress, because after all, they also don't just work for the president, they work for the American people. And we are the representatives of the American people. So we were expecting another one of these live briefings in September, and the new Director of National Intelligence, John Ratcliffe, just informed us that they're going to stop doing this, which they explained by saying that they're angry that there are leaks. Members of Congress leak to the press the contents of these top secret briefings. Now, and that, by the way, they're going to continue to, and this is important, they're going to continue to provide us these briefings in written form. Now, if their concern is that there are leaks, which admittedly there have been since like the 18th century in America, it's a problem. I don't mean to minimize it, but it's not anything new. If that's their concern, then you don't really fix it by providing a written briefing, because in fact, in some ways, it's even easier to leak out a written document than to remember what was said in one of those closed door sessions. So I think it's pretty clear that what's going on here is they don't want us to have the opportunity to actually question these professional folks at the CIA and the FBI and all of the other agencies that are out there gathering this information and trying to protect us. Because you know what? When we question them, they answer honestly. They'll tell us what the Russians are actually doing and the other countries, China, Iran, that they talk about are actually doing. And their answers are not always consistent with what the president might want us to believe. So by giving us written briefings, the senior political people there can control what is being said, and we don't have the chance to question it and to get further information. So look, this is outrageous. We've gotten sort of mild objections from Senate Republicans. I'm glad that they're sort of objecting, but they need to join us in saying that this is disrespectful to Congress. This sets a precedent. Like if I'm a Republican senator, I'd be thinking, does this now mean that a future Democratic president doesn't have to brief us, right? Does Joe Biden, if he's elected, run with this precedent? They don't want that. They don't want to, for the sake, I hope, of pleasing President Trump, completely and permanently change the relationship between the executive branch and the Congress in a way that disempowers the Congress.
More faith than I do.
Well, I'm suggesting what they should think. We'll see. They haven't shown a lot of courage.
I noticed that, in their convention, they had no platform until 2024. And I think they have it in mind that, we'll just put it all back together in 2024. And that's really ridiculous because a lot of damage is done in the meantime. So I don't know that they, would speak up. I think they'll put it all together at a later time.
Yeah, look, I don't make excuses for them, obviously. But I think, they're dealing with a weird situation, right? They put out a platform and the president issues a tweet the next day that contradicts the platform. So I think a lot of them are just throwing their hands up and like, our platform is the president's Twitter feed. Can't fight that.
All right, just to wrap up my question then, so you're going to get a written report, but does that, is there anything in this that says that then you can't question the written
Of course.
report?
They're kind of backtracking a bit and they're saying they will provide the oral briefing to the intelligence committees. What they have been doing, rightly so, is providing this briefing to all members of Congress. After all, we're all running in this election, at least in the House, and we need to know we're affected by election interference. I'm in an election in our district this November. I want to know. And I think the voters deserve to know. I actually think that, I've not said a word about what I learned in the last briefing I received, but frankly, most of what I learned could and should be revealed to the public. And some of it was, we really went in hard at them to put out a public statement after that last briefing we got that acknowledged the particular efforts that Russia is still making to try to influence our elections, specifically to hurt Joe Biden and to help President Trump, which they did. They did come out with that statement, and they specifically referenced these efforts by, well, I can't really describe them without revealing too much, but very suspicious figures in Ukraine to feed information to the US Congress, to feed false information to the US Congress to denigrate Vice President Biden. Again, they publicly said that, and they named these individuals in Ukraine. So, you know, we got them to say some useful things, but we need to continue to have that. None of this is fully resolved, right? We actually could get the full briefing. We're arguing about it. But that's where it stands right now.
Thank you, Tom. And thank you for all that you do and for being the best representative we've had in the 7th Congressional District in many, many years.
Well, thank you so, so much.
Thank you both. Our next question comes from Joan. Joan, can you hear us?
Yes, hi. Hi, Representative. My question was, how exactly does DeJoy get held responsible? But as I was listening, I was like, this is kind of the same question you keep getting and getting and getting. And so I will say it's not really a question anymore. I know there's not a whole lot you can do to make sure, but this man, this administration has destroyed so many things that we thought we could trust that it terrifies me. And I will say that I came on here mostly to hear your calming voice because I really count on it. And I'm working as hard as I can to get you reelected. So thank you.
Well, we do need people who can calm things down right now. And, you know, fear is a killer. And I try to find the right balance because there are some things that you should be anxious about, right? There are things that we should be upset about that are going on in our country, beginning with a lot of people suffering and, you know, 1,000 people dying a day from something that should have been prevented and could have been prevented. And so we should be upset about that. We should be affected by it. But too much fear also paralyzes people, right? If we decide we've lost our democracy and our institutions aren't working anymore and it's done, you know, there are two possible reactions to that. Some people just give up, and then some people start saying, let's burn things down. They're doing it, so we should do it. And that's totally wrong too.
Right.
And that actually plays right into the agenda of promoting conflict and civil war in this country and chaos, which furthers the very things that we want to avoid. So I think we got to, you know, you see an injustice, you see something that troubles you, work hard to oppose it, but don't lose faith in the country, our institutions, or the American people, because we've been through a lot worse than this before. We really have, and we've overcome. So we will again.
Thanks.
Thank you both. Our next question comes from Stuart. Stuart, can you hear us?
Yes, I can, but I think my question has already been answered. It was about the briefings and from the intelligence and FBI communities, you know, about the election. So I think you've handled that really well. Thank you. And I just want to say too, Tom, this has been great to hear you talk about these things, and you do give me confidence that we're going to be okay.
Thank you. Well, it's on all of us, and I know everybody here is going to be involved in making us okay. So that gives me confidence.
All right. Our next question comes from Rachel. Rachel, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Hi, Tom. So I've been phone banking for you and speaking to a couple of these undecided voters in a recent session. I learned that some of them are actually Democrats leaning toward Republican because of the concern about all the violent protests that are being mismanaged by the Democratic mayors, is the words they used. And I noticed during the Republican convention, this was the same message that was being enforced during the convention, and it's one of the talking points by the Republican. They're obviously trying to, fear mongering and everything. But what is your take on whether there is any validity to this concern? Are there Democratic mayors and governors that are handling the violence differently from the way the Republican mayors and governors are handling it? And how much responsibility does the federal government and the current administration have in managing the response to all the violence that's going on?
Well, thank you so much. As I suggested at the very beginning, I actually think there is a clear consensus on what's right and wrong here among most Americans. And we need leaders on both sides of the partisan divide to keep trying to strengthen that consensus. And what is the consensus? Number one, we saw what happened to George Floyd, right? We saw a suspect arrested by police in Kenosha and an officer pumping 7 bullets into his back. And most people see that, most police officers I know see that, and they say that's just wrong. And there's gotta be accountability for that. Number two, we see people, maybe because they're angry about the police violence, or maybe because they have some other agenda, go out on the streets and destroy small businesses, ruin people's livelihoods, burn communities. It's not a lot of people. Like many of us saw Black Lives Matter marches here in New Jersey. Mm-hmm. And of course, 99% of these marches across the country, 100% peaceful. But we've seen in some places, including Kenosha, real violence against property, radical young people, whatever they call themselves, Antifa or something else in Washington, D.C., threatening diners at restaurants, trying to enforce conformity with their point of view. And that's totally wrong too. And when it involves property destruction, it is a crime. They're not protesters anymore. And they need to be held accountable as well. And then we see a 17-year-old kid with an AR-15 that he's not supposed to have travel across state lines because he's been whipped up. He's been angered by all the stuff he's seeing online and told, go there and be a vigilante and take the law into your own hands. And then he murders 2 people. And a lot of other violence perpetrated by far-right militias, white supremacists. What happened in Portland a few nights ago, where a convoy of hundreds of pickup trucks driving through, imagine if you had pickup trucks driving through Westfield or Summit with guys firing paintball pellets at people on the street. I think we'd be a little upset about that, right? That's wrong too. All these things are wrong. And, everybody's got a responsibility to, number one, say they are all wrong and to try to use their influence and power to calm things down. I think I can't, sitting here in New Jersey, judge all the actions of the mayor of Kenosha or Portland. I don't live there. I can imagine they've got an incredibly difficult situation on their hands. And it is not helped when the president of the United States says that, actually eggs people on to go into these communities to do violence. When he condemns the mayor or the Black Lives Matter protesters who are 99% peaceful, but then seems to defend the 17-year-old kid with a gun who killed 2 people. Be even-handed. Everybody who breaks the law is a lawbreaker and should be held accountable. It's not complicated. And any president of our lifetime, whether it was Obama or Bush or Clinton or Bush or Reagan, they all would have said the right things. And this guy just can't seem to bring himself to do it. So look, I'm all about rule of law and trying to apply it equally to everybody, calling out everybody equally. I've tried to do it myself. I've said all the things I've said to you, I've said them publicly. Mm-hmm. And we just need everybody to do that.
There's no real argument then when they can insist that it's all the Democratic mayors where there's problems. What are we supposed to say to that?
Everybody should take responsibility, right?
Mhm.
Absolutely. It doesn't matter if you're Democrat, Republican. That's number one.
Right.
We don't have Democrat America and Republican America. It's just America. That's one.
Right.
Number two, everybody is responsible for their own realm. The mayor of Portland is responsible for Portland, and he will be held accountable by the voters in Portland. The president of the United States is responsible for every part of the country, everything that happens, not just in places that voted for him. He is responsible, and he needs to take responsibility too. That would be my answer.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Tom. Our next question, I don't want to mispronounce your name, but Killen?
Yes. Hello, thank you for taking my question and being here today, Representative Malinowski. I have a question regarding the Girls Lead Act. As a member of the Borgen Project, given that 132 million girls ages 6 to 17 are not currently enrolled in school worldwide, this has caused widespread effects, including like more child marriages, violence against women, and more civil conflict, especially in societies that don't necessarily have the same institutions and structures to support democracy. And so I was wondering whether you'd commit to supporting and co-sponsoring the Girls Lead Act, which would study how to overcome barriers to girls' civil engagement in democratic societies and political participation, while also supporting girls' civil society organizations abroad, especially in developing countries.
Thanks for the question. If that's what it does and I'm not already a co-sponsor, then yes, absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Cool. I've often thought that if I were like a multi-billionaire, like Bill Gates, and I could set up a foundation to work on one global cause, it would be girls' education, because I having been to places like Afghanistan and Iraq, that are the source of so many of the troubles that our country has faced internationally. One conclusion I came to is that if those countries invested in girls' education as much as they invest in education for boys, in fact, they invested more for both boys and girls, but particularly girls, I can't think of any investment that would make a bigger difference in helping those countries achieve peace and prosperity and democracy. So yeah, 100%.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Susan. Susan, can you hear us?
Is it all right if I change my question? Because
yeah, sure, of course.
Okay, great.
Anybody can ask anything.
I had another question, but it was more, I think we've kind of covered it. But now that we're talking about international things, could you please speak to the situation in Belarus and also possibly in Ukraine, and what the Russian involvement is in either of those countries right now?
Yeah.
Or both.
So, we've been talking about public protest. Anybody who wants to see what truly effective and courageous public protest is, Belarus is, they should look at the people of that country. This has often been referred to as the last dictatorship of Europe. It's been run by this guy Lukashenko ever since 1989, ever since the end of the Soviet Union. He's a thug. It's right next to Poland and Lithuania, which are completely open democracies. And they had an election, which the thugs stole, but it was, I guess, enough for the people of that country. They put up with enough. And they have, ever since that fraudulent election, been out on the streets showing incredible courage in the face of police that, of course, show zero restraint, and the potential of the military of the country being called out to shoot them, and possibly the Russian military entering Belarus to put this movement down. Now, why is Putin upset about this? Why does he care? Because if the people of Belarus can show that through peaceful activism and protest, they can overthrow a dictator, then the Russian people could get the same idea. That's one reason he went into Ukraine after there was a popular democratic revolution there. And so the fear is that he will do the same thing in Belarus. Now, what can we do about it? I wish we were setting a better example at home. I wish we had more moral authority abroad right now than we do. But what we should be doing is speaking and acting in lockstep with our European allies, with Germany and France and the UK and Poland and all the neighboring countries, to make clear to Putin that if he goes in, there will be even more sanctions applied to Russia than we have now, that there will be serious consequences, that we're not going to interfere either. We're not going to, in any direct way, try to manipulate what's happening in Belarus. We're not trying to bring them into NATO. We're not trying to embarrass or humiliate the Russians. We just want them to be free to make their own choices, and he should allow that as well. State Department said some of these things, but quietly and somewhat late. President hasn't said anything, and so the Europeans have really been in the lead. I'd like to see an American president and administration speaking out much more passionately about this, and again, in a coordinated way with our European allies.
Thank you, Tom.
Thanks.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Hector. Hector, can you hear us?
Great. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi.
Yeah.
How are you?
Good.
It just seems from all the conversations that are going on now that, the focus that we have to have now is, should Democrats be so fortunate, as to turn over the government, in January, what is it that needs to be done to ensure that this never happens again? Mm-hmm. With respect to things like, the disinformation that's been in the media, what are people thinking about with respect to legislation along the lines of truth in media, legislation along the lines of criminal penalties for malfeasance, as well as reinstating the equal access to broadcast media that was, repealed during the, I think it was Reagan administration, and also looking into monopolies of broadcast that was also made possible through FCC changes that happened back in the, I guess, 70s or 70s, that made, networks like Sinclair Broadcast, virtually have a monopoly over what people out in, in rural America hear.
Yeah.
Right. So are people thinking about that? I mean, because it seems to me that unless you can address that, basically we're back in the same situation once again, where disinformation and intransigence on the part of Republicans can basically just set us back down that same, spiral once again.
Yeah. So look, I think it's got to be framed. I think you're right to ask the question. I am a Democrat. I've got some partisan leanings. I try to frame it not in partisan terms. This is about any president of any party who may abuse power in the future. It's about maintaining the balance that our founders tried to establish in that Constitution we keep coming back to in this conversation. Look, there are a bunch of things, and we've alluded to some of them, that have to do with checks and balances. The independence of the Justice Department. We're going to have to put that in law in some way. It's been respected in practice, but it's going to have to be in statute. The inspectors general, as I mentioned, the ability for the president to use emergency powers, which he has under the law, to ignore congressional appropriations, for example. That's something we're going to have to take care of. Now, you're raising the media piece of this. And What makes that particularly complicated is that a lot of those old rules that we have were put into place when we had old media, right? We had television news and newspapers, and that's how we got all our information before the internet, before social media. I do think we need to look into the monopoly rules that allow a single operator to provide television news to huge parts of our country without any competition. So that applies to old media. But as for the new media on the internet, that is, I think, the biggest challenge, the most complicated challenge that we face. And here's the way I always describe it. When we were much younger, how did we get our information? We mostly families would gather in front of the TV at 7 p.m. and we'd listen to Walter Cronkite or whoever was ABC or NBC. We were a Cronkite family, so I don't remember. And, you know, then we'd go off and be Republicans and Democrats. We'd argue about our opinions, but we mostly got our facts from the same place. And those facts were moderated, edited by responsible journalists, human beings, who decided every single day, okay, what's important and what's true. Now, who is moderating, who is curating the news that you get and that I get? It's a social media algorithm. It's a piece of software that some kid in Silicon Valley wrote. And it is not deciding what is important and what is true. It is deciding what will keep you addicted to your screen, because they want you to stay online and buy stuff. And it turns out what keeps most people addicted to their screens, what keeps us engaged, is content that makes us angry and afraid. And so the algorithms are written in a way that gives everybody tailored content that makes us angry and afraid. If you're very conservative politically, you'll get stuff about, you know, Hillary is trying to destroy the country. If you're very liberal, it's Trump trying to destroy the country. And it's very, you know, completely different realities that are being presented to people depending on what the data says about your preferences. That's what we have to do something about. And I've actually been working hard on this. And I think a number of people on this call have heard me say this before. I'm hoping to have something I can introduce in September that deals with social media regulation, about the immunity that the social media companies currently enjoy for the harm that is caused by content that they host on their sites, not only host, but promote with these algorithms. So stay tuned.
Just as a follow-up, isn't like, and again, I'm not looking to be partisan. I think everyone should have a right to have a voice. I just think that, you know, it's what that saying was, you know, that saying that, you know, everybody has the right to their own opinion. They just don't have a right to their own facts. So it's just a matter of assuring that facts or information that gets put out over public media, if it's untrue, can be challenged, can be sued, can be, and the parties putting those out, whether it's, you know, broadcast media, print media, commentators, you know, or even individuals can be held accountable for putting out, information that can be proven to be untrue.
Well, I'd be a little careful there. You know, we don't want our experience with this president to cause us to overcompensate either. And, you know, my concern about putting it that way is that who then becomes the arbiter of what's true and what's false? You know,
jury of 12 good men.
I don't know. I mean, I think we would have to repeal the First Amendment to empower juries to criminally prosecute people for putting out something that a jury thinks is false. We do have libel laws in this country, and it's a very high bar, as you know, I'm sure, for being able to sue someone for libel. And you know, I have my experience as a diplomat. I was, you know, the Assistant Secretary of State for Human Rights under Obama, And I'd go around the world and I would hear from the Chinese government and Putin's government and the Saudi government, you know, we need to be able to punish people who say things that aren't true. And I was arguing with them, no, you can't be the judge of what's true or not, because from your point of view, anybody who criticizes you is telling a lie. And so you've got to leave that to the court of public opinion and allow free speech. So that's what makes this complicated, right? We're always going to have free speech in this country, including, and free speech does include the freedom to lie. It includes the freedom to say things that aren't true. But let's say the lie is somebody promoting a quack medicine on Twitter. And then people take that quack medicine and they get sick or they die. Well, right now, the only person you can sue is the person who posted that tweet. Should Twitter have some liability there? If a terrorist group, whether it's Hamas or some white supremacist group, is recruiting people with the help of Facebook, because Facebook is, you know, we love to connect people to their interests. And if your interest is terrorism, we'll connect you. Does Facebook have some liability in that situation? There, I think the answer is yes. But we're still going to have a First Amendment.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you both. Our next question comes from Patrick. Patrick, can you hear us?
Sorry. Yeah, thank you, Congressman. And you touched on it before about the impact of corporations given unlimited money. I mean, you know, for us as citizens, voters, what's the best way for us to support campaign finance reform, or just, you know, supporting Congress to actually do something about it? You know, it's kind of like the, you know, I don't know if it's
the best
yeah, to act on this, because it never happens, but it is ridiculous.
Yeah. So I'll tell you one thing that's happened in the last couple of years, and that is a lot of people have been running for Congress, taking a pledge not to take any corporate PAC contributions. And I was one of the first people who took that pledge. I've kept it. We'll continue to keep it. And of course, we want you to vote for us if we take that pledge, right?
Yeah.
That's politics, right? You make something a voting issue, and you vote for people who do what you think is right. And this is really new. And we now have well over 100 members of the House who took this pledge, which means everybody else is under pressure. Well, Malinowski took that pledge. Why don't you, right? And so we'll have more in 2021 than we did in 2019.
That's a fully transparent. I mean, there's no way to hide that if somebody is taking it, PAC money.
No, because contributions directly to our campaigns are publicly reported. So you can go online and you can see everybody who has donated to my campaign. What is not transparent are donations to these independent political action committees. Under Citizens United, they can spend an unlimited amount of money. I can't change that unless I change the Constitution, but we can force them to be transparent, just like candidates have to report their contributions. We can, and in the House, we've passed legislation to force them to report their contributions as well. So that's important. And, you know, McConnell is the sworn enemy of all this stuff in the Senate. So that's been, right. We have to flip the Senate for any hope for campaign finance reform. But we passed it in the House, and, you know, got a president who'll sign that bill, and a Senate majority willing to take it on. Then we're closer. And in the meantime, we've already, through these personal pledges, we've already started a movement to change the way politicians running for Congress, at least, get donations. And that's not insignificant.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, everyone, for sticking in there just a few minutes after the call. I will kick it back over to the Congressman for a closing remark. Again, I will post that email address again for anyone that has any questions regarding casework, anything regarding assistance with federal agencies or unemployment. I'll send that email around again. But for now, I'll throw it over to Congressman for closing remarks.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for a really interesting set of questions. I think we covered the waterfront here. And again, if there are any others that we didn't get to, please just leave them in the chat and we'll try to get back to you. I love doing these. This is now, I think we've lost count. DeAndre, do you even know? But it's well over 50 town hall meetings since I was elected in a little over a year and a half. We're doing them on Zoom now for obvious reasons. Can't wait to get back to doing them live. But either way, I'm committed to being accessible to voters. We advertise these widely. Anybody can come and ask anything. So I get a lot out of it. I learn what's going on with you and what you want me to be focusing on in the Congress. And I get to then be accountable to you because I tell you exactly where I stand on these issues and you can make your choices accordingly. So we'll continue to do them. And so I hope you'll continue to participate and please spread the word to friends and neighbors and coworkers who are interested in what's going on or angry about what's going on and also want a chance to speak directly to their representative. With that, everybody please stay safe and be well. And I look forward to our next chance to continue this discussion. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.